Ladies and gentlemen, the presentation is starting. Howard, please go ahead.
Thank you, George. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's e-seminar. Today's e-seminar is Data and Databases, the third pillar, brought to you by DataVale Database Services. Let me tell you a little bit about the session today. Before I do, I really would like to go over just a couple of quick housekeeping items so that you're aware of some of the capabilities available to you. We always want this to be an interactive experience for you, but to make it possible to keep within time, we ask that you enter your questions into the Q&A console. You should see that on your ON24 console right now. Feel free to enter a question at any time, and we will try to get to as many of the questions at the end of the session as we possibly can. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the seminar. That's when we'll actually handle those questions. Also, you can download a PDF copy of today's presentation, so don't feel like you have to take serious notes to keep up with the information that's on the screen. You can easily download the PDF. Also, DataVale has made available 2 white papers on the console, so feel free to download the PDF of the presentation and those 2 white papers at any time. Many of you like to share what's going on with your colleagues and associates, and we encourage you to do so. You don't even have to leave the console to do so. You'll see widgets at the bottom of the screen that make it possible for you to reach out via Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and other social media. Please feel free to use those as much as you possibly want to. The more people we bring into the e-seminar, the better. So share your thoughts with your colleagues freely. But the last thing I want to mention before we launch in is that at the end of the day today, we will be conducting a very brief survey that is meant to help us collect more information about what you want to see in these e-seminars, what you like, what you feel is valuable, and what you feel perhaps could be changed. So please, participate in the process, help us make these better for you, and stick around long enough to complete the survey at the end of our event. Okay. With that, I'd like to launch into talking about data and databases, the third pillar. The classic IT organization is structured into 2 main parts. We've all seen them: applications and infrastructure to run those applications. If you were to ask a CIO where the database group should report, most will have to pause, think about it, and may not be able to provide a very clear answer. Why? Because although the traditional IT organization doesn't recognize it, the database teams are inherently different from the others. The problem is they are also much, much smaller than the others. Because of its small size, we find database teams spread across both the applications and infrastructure organizations. The application DBAs mainly focus on assisting the development teams with performance and database design to support the required applications, while the infrastructure DBAs focus on the technical support side of maintenance, operations, production support, and so on. Essentially, we see the build teams, the architects, the engineers, separated from the run teams, the operations people, and production support. But things are changing. All of a sudden, in concert with the explosive growth of data, there is more focus on data as a strategic asset. Now, it's beginning to make sense to create that separation and split data off from applications and infrastructure, creating our third pillar, data. No longer will organizations be thinking only in terms of applications and infrastructure. Now data, although still smaller, will sit side by side with the other 2. With this organizational evolution, data has a seat at the table. The data organization will be smaller but disproportionately important relative to its size. The data organization can now aggregate all professionals who work with data from operations up through analytics, and inclusive of security and governance. To discuss this topic, we have 2 very exciting guests with us. One is the president and CEO of DataVale, Mark Perlstein, a national leader in database support and professional services. For more than 2 decades, Mark has been a leader in the IT services market, brings a wealth of growth-oriented and operating experience to the services business to Datavale. Prior to his CEO role at Datavale, Mark was president of Cyber's IT outsourcing division. While there, he led Cyber's entry into the IT infrastructure outsourcing market and helped lead that division to a tripling of its revenues, becoming a major force in the ITO sector. Mark is an active leader in the IT community and is committed to excellence in service delivery, customer satisfaction, and team building inside Datavale. With him is Noel Johanna. Noel has more than 20 years of experience in IT and has held various technical and management positions. He came to Forrester through its acquisition of Giga Information Group. Noel serves application development and program delivery professionals. He primarily covers database management systems, infrastructure as a service, data replication and integration, data security, data management tools, and related online transaction processing issues for Forrester. His current primary research focus is on customer usage experiences and broad industry trends of DBMS, IaaS, data security, enterprise data grids, outsourcing, information lifecycle management, open source databases, and other emerging database technologies. Noel has spoken at numerous industry conferences around the globe, is quoted frequently in industry publications such as CNET News, Computer World, eWeek, InfoWorld, Information Week, Forbes, Search.com, The Wall Street Journal, and The New York Times. He's taught several technical and management programs on grid computing, data management, security, scalability, consolidation, and information fabric, and we're very excited to have him with us today. Before I let Noel take over, I'd like to push out the first of our two polling questions today so we can start off with some feedback from you in the audience that Noel can dig his teeth into to get rolling. So our first polling question, please answer this by clicking on the choice that you feel applies best to you. In your organization, where do your DBA's databases fit into your organizational structure? In the applications group? In the infrastructure operations group? In the business unit? As a standalone data group? None of the above, or you're not sure and don't exactly know. Please click the choice of your choice and then press submit. And we'll give that a few seconds for everybody to start answering. Noel, before we actually push out the responses, perhaps you have some thoughts as to what you expect to see as the answers?
Well, I guess, a lot of folks actually do have DBAs spread across different groups, so they will be in the application team as well as the infrastructure team as well, So.
Okay, well, let's take a look. Here we go. 43% of our attendees have already responded, and here are their answers. It looks like it is spread across the applications group and the infrastructure operations group fairly evenly.
Yep, that's what we expected, I guess, and that's where we are today, so cool.
Okay, well, I'm going to hand it over to you. Take it away, Noel.
Okay, thanks a lot. So thanks for having me today on this webinar. I'm glad to be here presenting on this webinar. I'm Noel Johanna, Principal Analyst with Forrester. I've been in the IT industry for more than 25 years, and actually I lost track of how many years I've been actually in IT. But it's interesting kind of things of how the evolution of IT has happened over the last many decades. Over the last 10 years, I've been focusing as an industry analyst, focusing on the trends and the future of data management, and other technologies as well. Today's topic is a very interesting one, the third pillar of IT organization. So we're going to go through some of the things as to why do we care about this third pillar in an IT organization, right? Why is data important to us today than ever before? So I'm going to give you some answers about some of the things and where we see this going, and what are some of the other customers doing in this regards as well. If you look at it, that data growth and new business requirements are driving the need for a new data management organization, right? there's a tremendous amount of data growth happening. I mean, I think every organization, I speak to about 3 to 4 customers every day as inquiry calls and different types of advisory calls. And, they all talk about data volume. It's terabytes and petabytes of information, right? I mean, and actually that creates a bigger challenge within the IT organizations as to how do you manage this humongous data set, And also the business requirements have changed. If you look at last 10 years or 20 years or even 5 years, the business requirements have changed for the applications, for the data. And I'll talk about those things as well. Now, this actually changes the way we can't really simply operate an IT organization based on what we had a decade ago. We've got to change based on the requirements. We've got to change based on the things we've seen in terms of volumes, in terms of velocity, and the business requirements as well, So what's interesting with this chart, if you see, is that for decades, we have built applications in silos, right? And each working very independent, right? You had a CRM application, you had an ERP application, and ERP application had their own database. Could be Oracle, SQL Server, Sybase, DB2, you name it, right? There could be any database running on that. And we had to tightly couple those databases, right? We had an application sitting on top of a database. And, I used to build applications decades ago as well. And I think, this actually fundamentally hasn't changed. And, 10 years ago, we used to build one application every 6 months, because that's a very huge, big project with about 50 people involved in that or 100 people involved in that as such. But I think the fundamental things are changing now as well. And people are building more applications today. In fact, I was speaking to one of the financial services company. They're building tens of new applications every week. And a different kind of a model altogether, I mean, and those models are different. I'll talk about those things. But, those clustering of data becomes very difficult. You have to actually decouple some of those data points as well. Typically, applications are supported by 2 key organizations in IT. One is the app dev team, and the second one is the operational team. In fact, we just saw the survey, which says 21% of people were doing, the DBAs are in operational team, and 24% I think is in app dev team, which is not surprising, right? So, and typically app dev team is responsible for application development requirements, for coding, for testing, for change management. Operational teams, I guess, are responsible for these scenarios of how do you deliver operational applications. So for the DBA perspective, again, they get split across these 2 teams, as I mentioned. They typically don't have a separate team altogether, which is why, because it's fundamentally based on how applications were developed and deployed for decades, CRM, ERP, SCM applications, right? And that's how the DBAs actually work. And that actually worked very well, actually, right? I mean, that typically has worked very well because it's actually where you have these types of requirements, right, where you want to have the DBA supporting an application development, right? You could be doing application coding. You can be writing triggers and store procedures in the development team. This is what the development DBA does in an app dev team. They're writing code. They're developing databases for testing and development and Q&A. They're creating a copy or subsetted. They're making refresh copies of these production databases onto test environments. So there's a lot to do with the DBAs and architects involved in the application team. And as I mentioned, that's worked very well because you have the ERP systems, the CRM systems that require that fundamental architecture and framework in place. And the operational DBAs were focusing, as I mentioned, on troubleshooting. It's in production. When you have a pager, you need to have something like, okay, I got this problem with my system. I got to actually tune, optimize it, upgrade it, migrate it, all of these things, right? So the production DBAs actually are responsible to making sure these mission-critical applications deployed on these systems are actually running 24/7. So this is the fundamental thing, as what we've seen. I'm sure in your organizations, you're seeing that same alignment as well, where you have the DBAs in both places. Sometimes, and at least as it logically, maybe not physically, sometimes right. But maybe they are part of application development team, but they also are responsible for operational DBA or vice versa. But typically, it's separate, right. But what's changing now, right? I mean, if you think about it, this worked very well, the whole framework we've had it. But now the data requirements are changing, right? I mean, if you look at things of how the data is growing and data is becoming the most important asset today, right? I mean, the fact is that you have many of these organizations, I guess, right, exploding with data sets, I guess, right? And obviously, the data becomes a very important asset for an organization to increase revenue, to increase profitability. If you know your customers very well, you may want to make a better product based on customer feedback. The data becomes very important. You want to know about their behavior. Are they moving from this vendor to that vendor? For what's the reason behind these customers moving? Customer intelligence, for example, is all data-driven, right? I mean, you ought to know, like in Twitter land or Facebook, what are people talking about your products and scenarios. That becomes critical as well, right? So you need to understand the customer very well. And I think it's all about data. And, these are not applications like CRM and ERP that's going to help you to address some of those things of the next generation applications that you're deploying. These next generation applications are fundamentally changing the way data needs to be represented in an organization. That needs to be managed and handled as well. So we're talking about the whole decoupling application from the data, right? We're not building this application for this data. No. The data needs to be shared, collaborated, integrated across many different applications, right? And that's the fundamental things which we're talking about here, as the data requirements are changing. And if the data requirements are changing, so should your organizational structure as well. Because as we mentioned, for decades, for the last 20, 30 years, we've been doing IT. We've been very tightly coupled with these frameworks of how we develop applications. But now, actually, it's a different kind of a focus altogether, right? One thing which I wanted to talk about is whole data explosion, right? I mean, this huge, humongous data explosion into terabytes and petabytes, right? I mean, I've seen customers who are talking about terabytes now already. So these are telcos and financial services industries, retailers. And that's not surprising, The amount of data we have is just huge. We haven't yet just dealt with the data. Most of the data we have dealt with is structured data sets and from the CRM and ERP systems. But guess what? There's a lot of data which is also external to your data to your organization, or data which we have never captured before, like sensor data, weblog data, clickstream data, and other types of data information that's very important for your business. And why is it important? Well, as I mentioned, right, you want to do a better analysis as to why was this customer on our website trying to look for some of these products, but yet did not buy that product. Guess what? That information is not in your CRM database. Why? Because that customer is not a customer today. He was just browsing it. And you want to get those information because you want to get a better sense as to maybe it's a pricing, maybe they were worried about, or they were trying to look at better solutions or something like that. So, I mean, all of this information has become so valuable for us to make a better decision. At the end of the day, why are you in an organization today? Well, you want to increase more revenue for the company, increase the profitability. And it's all about data, which actually helps you drive that, right? Again, when you have data explosion, you're going to impact applications, right? I mean, these large amounts of data sets impacts applications. It creates management challenges and increased costs. I think, all the DBAs I speak to and data architects and system administrators, they're actually struggling today more than ever before. Why? Because you're dealing with large amounts of data of tens and hundreds of terabytes, which actually becomes so complex trying to manage them today. I was speaking to one of the financial services company. They have more than 50,000 databases. 50,000 databases. They lose a track of how many databases they have. Obviously, they have many DBAs trying to manage it. But imagine trying to manage 50,000 databases, and they predict this will double in the next 3 to 5 years because they're building so many different applications and all these things, right? And almost new sources of data coming together, they need to have this many databases. Trying to manage these becomes really a nightmare, I think, for some of these organizations. And what it means, is that you need to have a better kind of a framework to manage some of the data there. This is a very good kind of a survey at Forrester we did. And we talked about, okay, what's your best estimate about how much data is currently stored within your organization, right? If you look at it, there's a trend towards this whole petabytes of information, petabytes, not even terabytes, right? I know even a 5-10 terabyte ERP system today is huge. People struggle with that, even 5-10 terabytes. Talking about petabytes is just too much, right? So this talks about the structured, unstructured, semi-structured data is growing into petabytes. And that's huge, right? All of these organizations actually are exploding in this data set. 90% of the world's data was created in the last 2 years. That's huge, right? If you look at the humongous amount of data sets we have, it just represents that there's lots of data out there with structured, unstructured, semi-structured data sets, and some of this data which will exist even externally as well. It could be social networks, cloud platforms, SaaS environments as well, not just on-premise as well. So it'll be a combination of those things together. In fact, if you look at it completely, it's about 3.5 zettabytes. I don't think we have used the word zettabytes as much as what we should be using, but I think next 5 years you're going to see lots more talks about zettabytes, just because this is a tremendous amount of data from the sensor data, from all of these geolocation, all your cell phones, all of your video cameras, and all of your social networks. That's a tremendous amount of data. And that's actually, if you start putting all this data together, again, management, administration, access becomes a nightmare, I guess, right? And this is actually a very interesting kind of a survey we did. What's the largest of the size of production transactional database today you have? We did this survey earlier this year. About 11% state more than 50 terabyte database they have today of a transactional system. Now, 50 terabytes doesn't seem to be huge, but I think if you ask any DBA, it's actually a lot of effort required in managing a 50 terabyte databases, from the backups, from the recovery, from the tuning, from optimization. And besides, as I mentioned, they have many of these databases, which actually creates a bigger challenge, right? And I think this is actually a fundamental thing. Maybe 5-7 years ago, we didn't really see as many 50 terabyte transactional systems. Maybe it's like 1 or 2%. It's 11%. That's huge. Now, I think this number is going to double within the next 2 years. In fact, maybe tripling, actually. So there's a huge swing going on here. And by the way, this is only for a single application running. It's not for multiple applications, but it's a single application running that you need so much of data out there. So tremendous. Okay, now we're on to this new, I think, polling question we have as to what are the top challenges for your data management in your organization today.
Yeah, you've been talking about challenges throughout, and I thought it would be a good idea at this point to stop and ask the audience what their top challenges are in database management. The choices that we have are delivering improved performance, round-the-clock 24/7 coverage, integrating data, the lack of people resources, especially those that are trained for the new technologies and the new tools that are out there, securing private data, delivering higher availability, high data volume growth, upgrading their databases, too many databases. You were just talking about 50,000 databases, and migrating databases. So if everybody in the audience would check off the one that they feel applies, the ones that apply to them. You can check as many or as few as you'd like, and when you're finished, simply click Submit, and we'll take a look at the results in a moment after everybody's had a chance. And at this point, we've got about a quarter of our attendees replying. Let's give it just a few more seconds. And once again, Noel, you've been talking about challenges. Which of these do you think we're going to find to be most prevalent amongst our participants?
Well, I guess, performance is definitely an important one. I think people struggle with performance all the time, and I think that hasn't changed over the last many years, just because, we're dealing with larger volumes of data sets, so performance definitely is an important area of focus, So.
Well, let's see. We have about 40% of our attendees replying already, so let's take a look. And indeed, you're right on target. Delivering improved performance is the number one with 63%. Over a third of our participants have a problem with too many databases, and the other one that was very highly selected was integrating data. Any surprises here?
No. I think this really points up very well with what we see in our survey results as well. That integrating data, performance are both critical components, and of a challenge today. I think every organization, whether it's a smaller organization or even larger organizations, struggle with these two areas. Okay. So I guess in fact, this actually ties very well to the survey we just did actually a couple of months ago at Forrester. 80% of the folks today are complaining about performance. And we've done this survey every year almost over the last many years, like 7-8 years. Performance has always been the number one. In fact, it used to be 60%. Today it's like more than 80%, I think, across organizations. And I think this ties very well to the data that we have. I guess is that people have actually lots of data sets, right? I mean, they're growing into terabytes and petabytes, and trying to manage them, response time becomes terrible, I guess, right? I used to run benchmarks, about 15 years ago, these database benchmarks. And what's interesting is, we used to run a terabyte database, by the way, back then, 15, 20 years ago. I used to do some of the benchmarks. And 1 terabyte database you have to put this into 1,000 disk drives. Why? You want to actually minimize the latency on the disk drives actually from these access, And those things still kind of exist today. There's a lot of moving parts. Sometimes you have to better optimize and organize your database to actually deliver a lot of performance and scale. Integrating data is number 2, which is not surprising on this list as well, which tied to about 60% of people in our survey we did just a while ago. Integrating data, you have, as I mentioned, you have all of these different types of sources of data, structured, unstructured, semi-structured data. You have those thousands of sources. Integrating those from many sources together creates a bigger challenge. How do you manage that integration, right? So it's kind of good to see that, it kind of aligns very well with our survey, which we did. About 75% people complaining about integration of data. And I think this becomes an even bigger challenge when you start to integrate external sources and internal sources and all of the good stuff, I guess, in this regards. Security is important, high availability, data volume growth. If you look at the list out there on this survey, there's huge amount of pain which organizations have, Now, data volume growth requires more focus on data than ever before. Now, if you look at fundamentally, right, I mean, data hasn't been a big focus until now. Why? Because it's got very embedded within the application. I'm not talking about data. I'm talking about CRM data. I'm talking about ERP data. But guess what? That's changing, as I mentioned, because you're now building new applications like analytics, predictive analytics, doing real-time decision-making. These have nothing to do with some of these things like ERP systems, actually. And that data becomes very important for you. And actually, the focus of this requires a better strategy in place. If you don't have a better strategy today, you're actually going to have a problem in the coming years in terms of not only managing the data, but also your business may be impacted in terms of revenue, in terms of profitability, in terms of how you're going to spend probably more trying to manage some of these databases and data sets altogether. I think today organizations need 24/7 availability of their data and databases. Why? Because we have these global applications, global users. You can't really shut down these databases anymore. You can't shut down some of these data sets anymore just because it's going to be required to be 24/7. It's improved data security controls are critical as well, right? I mean, security is important, and I think you can't just lose track of security because people hack in, and there are a lot of hackers out there. We still know that. You still see a lot of reports coming out in the newspaper talking about someone broke into a retailer and or manufacturer, and they steal data. And there are a lot of sophisticated ways to actually steal data today. You can be sitting somewhere across the world and trying to hack into your database, actually, right? So I think security becomes very important, and that's the reason why you're not looking at it from the application perspective. Security, ERP. They're not talking about credit card data. So the fundamental focus of security is changed now. It's more about data-driven security, data-focused security, not about ERP data security or CRM. Fast response times, right? You want to have databases. You want to support various applications, ensure scalability. So all of these things matter a lot for databases today than ever before. Now, if you look at it fundamentally, right, there are new applications which are requiring data access that are integrated across all these sources, right? If you look at all of these kind of scenarios where you have these mobile banking and e-commerce and ticketing and maps and gaming and all of these social networks, I mean, all of this requires a lot of data, I guess, right? And I think they are focusing on, as I mentioned, these applications could be many of these applications, right? And that's the reason why you actually have to think about how do we decouple some of these scenarios as well. Also, there's a demand today for real-time applications that are requiring data that's centralized, trusted, and integrated. If you look back on the survey we just did, right, just 5-10 minutes ago, integrating data was very important, right? And why is that important? I guess because you want to make decisions which are more better in terms of getting all data together and making a decision based on that data sets. And that data set may exist in multiple sources, not just one single source, right? Also, real-time applications are requiring that's centralized and trusted. Now, I think talking about real-time applications, you're talking about predictive analytics out there, which is a huge market and demand out there. And you want to be able to predict what the customer needs today and tomorrow and the future. What is their fundamental thing? Like customer, we talked about 360-degree view of a customer, right? I mean, in terms of what they are doing with your systems in terms of ERP, CRM. But we also are looking at towards a multi-dimensional view of a customer, which means that we need to know customer behavior. We need to know their friends and family. What are they buying? What kind of systems they have today? Where are they located? Where are there different people involved in this? Imagine if your friend moves from a telephone carrier A to telephone carrier B. Your friend may also move around, right? I mean, you may also move around with that. Just because the fact that there's a lot of association with some of these information that needs to be all integrated together, right? There's also upselling, cross-selling opportunity out there with all these real-time applications, real-time business intelligence, supporting compliance and all these things, right? So I guess you get the picture about that. Whole of these requirements for these applications require data. And the new application requires data to be decoupled from the application. So you have application tier, you have the data tier, and the infrastructure tier. Remember if we showed a chart earlier on where we only had 2 tiers, technically? We had the application tier and the infrastructure team, or the layer. But I guess fundamentally what we're seeing is a shift here towards having the 3 tiers, where you have the application and data and the infrastructure. Data being a separate entity altogether. Data having a value in an organization because it's integrated data sets, it's real-time data sets, and that actually can drive different applications out there. And we are kind of having a decoupling scenarios. We have already seen this trend in certain large organizations where they're trying to pull away the data as a separate unit. Data integration, data virtualization, data fabric layers. And that actually becomes a next big thing. Why? Because you can actually drive innovation, right? Because data is the new oil. You can actually do improve decision-making based on data. In fact, this has nothing to do with applications. You may write new applications for the data you may have. You may want to be having new types of real-time applications driving mobile applications, cloud application driving some of these data elements, right? And I think this really changes everything, right? Because what we see fundamentally is that if you have a very strong element of data, you can actually get a better value about customer intelligence, whether they like your product or not, whether they are ready to buy some new products from you guys. It can also deliver competitive advantage, the data itself, which I think is fundamentally important in making better decisions as to what you have, right? And also increase your revenue and profitability, which I think is a huge factor for organizations. Now, coming to this point, I guess, why do we care about this third pillar? I think this really changes the way we operate, the way we have to align ourselves to the fundamental business requirements, right? The fundamental business requirements have changed over the last few years because data has become more important, as I mentioned. And if you just keep them, the DBAs and data architects and all those folks, kind of integrated or kind of a part of application development team and the operational team, you not find the value of data then, because the data has to be in its own kind of a layer altogether, which delivers value, so that you can actually do a better job in availability, scalability, integration, and also provide as a collaboration platform for business users to operate on. So I would say, to innovate, to gain a competitive advantage, to support agility, a data management team, which is what we're talking about, third pillar in this webinar, has become critical. And this pillar, the third pillar, I think is the most important pillar today in your IT organization. It's all about data. It's not about your server you're running about. It is important, but not the most important thing. It's about the applications, but applications don't contain data. It's about data management. It's all about your data. Your credit card data, your customer data, your product data, your engineering data, and all of these make decisions altogether, which I think is fundamental difference. And I think we've seen this third pillar already, as I mentioned, in certain organizations in the financial services sector, in some of the retailers, in the manufacturing, even the telcos, to some degree. But I think this is yet to come in a big way because we have to align ourselves around that. The data management team, I guess, needs to be to evolve, I guess, to include many different functions. Now, things like database administration, things like data warehousing and data marts and operations of data and governance and security, and all of the various other related scenarios like data steward and others. And I think this is important. You want to put all data team folks together, aligned with this data management group. So if you don't have a data management group, I would highly recommend you start to think about that and actually start to build upon that. And why? Because once you create this team separate, you actually add a lot of value. You actually provide a better vehicle for collaboration, ensure data availability, security, scalability. You actually provide that whole framework. Now, you obviously need the people of data together, right? As I mentioned, if you have data warehouses separate, that doesn't really work because you really have to understand this data. A very important point to have this data team together is because we are heading towards more real-time data needs. If you think about it, mobile platforms are making their way into enterprises. Today, if you have your smart device, your iPhones and Blackberries and Androids, what are you doing with those things? You're checking emails and Facebook and Twitter. What about my enterprise data sets? Right? Can I do better decisions on my smart devices? Yes. And this is a big trend emerging where we see this whole platform where enterprises are starting to integrate those things where mobile application can take away these data sets which are just enriched and full of value to provide better decisions and enhance the business user productivity as well. And I think that's the fundamental things around this. So I believe when you have a real-time platform, you need to have a team of data management people who actually can work together closely enough and provide that value. Now, instead of having data which is very old data sets, we want data in more real time. And I think having an organizational structure which can address that need of real time needs to work together. And that needs to happen in a single team, actually, as opposed to having it across multiple folks. Why have a separate team? I guess someone may say, well, it doesn't really make sense to have a separate team, right? So why have a separate team? Well, it delivers agility. I think that's the number one reason, I guess, we find, is to support these new initiatives of real-time applications, which I'm talking about, mobile application, integrated applications. It deals with data more efficiently than ever before, right? I mean, it's a focus, as I mentioned, about security, availability, scalability, integration, trustedness. If you don't have the team together, you can't actually deliver this. Centralizes policies, governance, makes your systems more efficient, more productive, and delivers innovation. Now you can focus on new things like in-memory databases, Hadoop platforms, NoSQL platforms as well. If you don't have that alignment, well, you're going to have this kind of this whole innovation spread across different groups, which may not be really meaningful because some businesses may find it more efficient use of Hadoop, but some others may not. And I think when you drive a central approach to these innovations, you can actually take the entire business to the next level, which is why I believe, having some of these data management team actually changes the way we manage and operate and really create the value of data. In addition, I would actually recommend, having also to look at these managed database services. Now, managed database services actually can help lower your cost as well as improve efficiencies as well. Managed database services actually are these third-party vendors who actually help you with complementing your existing staff. Now, why do you care about this? Well, if you look at some of those trends, there's a lot of data explosion happening. There are lots of more databases today than ever before. How do you manage these databases? How do you do a better job in providing a value to business users, right? And as I mentioned, you're building multiple applications today. I've seen customers tell me where the business users walk up to the DBA and say, well, I need to test my applications. And the DBA's answers would be, yes, come back next week. We'll provision you a database. That's not good enough. Because the fact that we are running in this whole real-time platform kind of a focus, you really have to have some of these things taken care of right away. You want to have these provisioning and of these databases for test and development, but also being able to manage these datasets fairly quickly enough, right? So I think managed services actually can help you with some of these installation and monitoring and backup and recovery. It actually complements the stuff. If you look at the number of DBAs, actually they haven't actually doubled or grown as many in organizations. Yet the volumes have grown tremendously. So there's a gap. And what happens with that kind of model is that the focus is only like 5-10% for the DBAs of those databases that exist today. 80-90% don't even get the attention they need. It creates even a bigger problem for organizations. Once the system goes down, well, they got a bigger problem. I think seriously, I think this is actually a big thing where organizations should be looking at managed services in a big way. It can help lower the cost. We have spoken to organizations who have saved millions of dollars, over these managed services. Just because you can actually offload some of the 24/7 operations and consolidation and upgrade strategy altogether for these managed services to operate, and it also makes the data management team more efficient. Right? Why? Because they are allowing them to focus on the core business issues, such as high availability requirements, innovation, which I think is critical components, right? And sometimes, when the DBAs are just doing performance and tuning all the time, they forget about high availability. They forget about the business requirements and innovation. Well, we got to think about some of those things as well as to how we can actually improve the efficiencies of these databases. So you got to be a bit more innovative as well. And I think this takes away that focus from what they were doing previously, like tuning and optimization, to more about high availability and business requirements being met. I guess my recommendations, for those organizations who do not have this third pillar, is to definitely start to consider having this third pillar. And I think if you do that, you're going to find a lot of value in doing this. All organizations actually should benefit. If it's a medium-sized organization, if it's a large organization, to have a separate data management team. It's starting out with the data-focused personnel, which is already there, moving them there. There's the DBAs and the data architects and the data stewards and data security folks into that team, so that they can work together, collaborate together, and deliver the value which needs, and make that data available to people who then can make better decisions in real time and in self-service manner, and be also enable innovation as well, which I think is huge. Now, data management team should include, as I mentioned, data architects, DBAs, data warehousing specialists, data stewards, all of these coming together and working together. And by the way, we have seen in some of the organizations already, and that have had a very huge success. They haven't looked back in moving away from that data management team, because once they found the value in this, not only from the cost perspective, from the efficiencies, but also innovating some of these new ideas, like doing new things like predictive analytics on top of their data sets, which they have never done before. Enterprises that have a third pillar strategy are more likely to innovate, as I mentioned, increase revenue, as well as stay ahead of the competition. Now, your competitors, I'm sure, are on the call, are probably also, some of these may also be jumping ahead and kind of starting to put together this whole data management team, because I think this is a fundamental thing of having the biggest kind of a change required in IT organizations. We have never had this big change, and I think change sometimes, is slow, I know, but I think change is important for organizations to look at this third pillar because it really changes the way how we operate. And I guess if you don't do this change, your competition may be ahead of you in the coming years. Also, consider managed services that can help you lower your cost as well as improve your efficiencies. I know that we are dealing with all of these large amounts of data, large or many databases. Not all DBAs can manage thousands of databases, right? You really have to supplement with like a managed services providers who can actually help you install, configure, backup, tune, all these things of these databases. So I think it's a very good strategy, and I think those people who do that actually can really save money and actually really innovate on some of data management areas as well. I guess with that, I would like to thank you, and I guess hand it over to Mark.
Thanks, Noel. So as we head towards the last part of the presentation today in the discussion, I wanted to take a moment and go back to where we originally started by sort of bringing up that question to the CIO, where should your DBAs, BI specialists, data analysts report? And the difficulty of getting that clear answer, which I think is actually less of a commentary on the CIO today and more of an acknowledgement that the way organizational design concepts have evolved over time and colliding today with the explosion of data and the importance of data is sort of acknowledging a hole in the way that we've grappled with or dealt with the organizational design of the IT organization in most enterprises today. And it's an acknowledgement that data is inherently just different, and it doesn't fit cleanly into either the application stack purely or the infrastructure stack purely. I've been in this business for 25 years, as has Noel. I've seen infrastructure outsourcing providers either ignore or not deal well with the data and the database operations team as a domain of expertise. I've watched data and database teams struggle to obtain the resources for 24/7. And then the ultimate problem occurs where the top tier 3 and tier 4 DBAs and BI specialists and analysts inside an enterprise get absolutely consumed and pummeled with lower tier work, essentially preventing those top tier, more capable people who are supposed to be adding more value to their enterprises and being unable to do so because they have to deal with this just massive amount of operational support that occurs. And then lately, given the explosion of data and the importance of DBAs, data architects, and just the topic of data generally, observing organizational tension as data has taken center stage and caused some of these conversations to take place inside. So I thought I would actually touch on the third rail of our discussion today, which is really the issues of decisions, politics, and change. I used to tell a story that the 7 layers of the OSI model are lacking 2, and 8 and 9 are religion and politics. And the reality is that we don't need to radically upset organization structures today to begin to embrace the change and set ourselves down a path towards where we ultimately probably need to head. But we do need to recognize that not everything important means that it has the largest head count within it. And so my recommendation is that we start to think differently about the data and the operational components of database administration that fall underneath this umbrella. We think about staffing it differently, and we think about sourcing it differently. And so in a nutshell, instead of throwing data and database operations into either the infrastructure or application outsourcing initiatives that go on inside so many enterprises, that we pause for a moment, peel it out, and consider it separately, consider the ramifications of what happens when you bundle it inside those and what benefits and advantages might occur if we were to separate it. And so just a moment about DataVal, and this will be very quick. We've become the largest pure-play provider of database services in North America. We've built ourselves now to over 350 DBAs and growing. We do have an onshore-offshore delivery model that is very mature and works extremely well for our customers. We've been growing incredibly aggressively, especially over the last 3 or 4 years. We have a 60% compounded annual growth rate over the last 4 years, and we see no signs in that slowing down. We've been somewhat of a consolidator in the pure-play database services market as well. We acquired Blue Gecko US out of Seattle, which was a 10-year provider of database services in the Seattle market. We also acquired the database services group and division from the Blue Wolf Group in December of last year. So in the last 12 months, we've made those 2 acquisitions, and we are certainly looking to expand as we move forward in our evolution. And we do actually deliver a real, true 24/7 managed service. We focus on almost all of the key database technology stacks, Oracle EBS, Microsoft SQL Server, MySQL, all flavors of DB2, and building out a MongoDB practice. And so with that, I just want to thank everybody for their attendance today. I want to thank Noel for a great presentation today, and obviously we'll be available for any questions or follow-ups that you may have.
Okay, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Noel. Before we wrap up today, just a couple of quick things. First of all, questions and answers. Let's jump into that. Let's see. We have about 10 minutes left. So let me start with the first question that was asked. Is there any case history of taming the huge amount of available data in engineering science? And I guess this question is open to either Noel and or Mark.
Sorry, can you repeat the question, I guess? I couldn't get you.
Sure. Has there been any case history of taming the huge amount of available data in engineering science?
I mean, I guess, there are organizations who are dealing with large amounts of data, right? And you have actually Hadoop, which actually can store lots of data, I guess, right? Databases have some limitations of what they can store, but Hadoop also actually plays a very important role in certain unstructured data sets, especially data which may be very difficult to organize as well. But, relational databases and data warehouses also have expanded their scope to hundreds of terabytes a day, as well. But so I think a combination of those 2 technologies could actually help you offload some of the data sets, So I guess, I guess we can probably have to dig deeper as to what exactly the data is all about for your organizations. But Hadoop and data warehouses should help,
Okay. Well, next question may help us follow up a bit. What examples do you have of companies that have made data its own group, and what impact is it having on those companies?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, there's been, as I mentioned in my presentation, right, there's had a lot of impact. The fact is that data is always hidden from business users. Has been hidden for decades, In fact, business users are not even aware of some of the data sets which got made available to the data management team. So it's really cool actually when you have this data management team start to actually make this data available to business users, to different types of groups, to line of businesses, functional businesses. And I think that really is a fundamental thing. Now, as I mentioned, there are a couple of things. Number one is the data availability, making it available to people in that regard for analytics, predictive analytics, and new innovation. That's like the fundamental thing. But also, it improves the efficiencies of data management as a whole. When you have people for warehouse specialists and DBAs and data architects sitting together in an organization, you can make data management more efficient, right? I mean, you can actually service this in more real-time, in more self-service, more integrated manner. It can also reduce cost because the fact that, you may have some duplication of data, you may have some duplication of environments, which I think is a fundamental thing, right? If you have the team which is spread across many different organizations, it really creates a bigger hurdle for all these things, right? So I think it's about productivity, it's about innovation, it's all about giving more value to an organization. So we've seen use cases, as I mentioned, across healthcare, across retailers, across financial services organizations who have gone and done this, have found a lot of value and hey, they're making more money out of this, and they may be your competitor who's probably just ahead of you guys. Why? Because of their whole differentiator through this data management team.
Okay, Mark.
Noel, this is Mark.
Can I answer that?
Yes, thank you. Just following up on the question a little bit. So I'm going to hold off mentioning any specific client names of ours or organizations we know of that have made that change. But if you'd like to talk privately to us about that, I can certainly talk about those examples. And here's what I can say. This is an evolutionary change, and I think that what we're seeing are the early stages of beginning to walk down that evolutionary path. And the initial indicators for adoption are being shown in the way the problems are being approached. So we are seeing more and more enterprise-level clients and a slew of middle-market customers beginning to peel away database operations, data analytics, BI, and database services from their normal sort of thinking around sourcing. I can point to no less than a dozen examples of clients who have either decided to remove database services from their infrastructure RFPs or are today, right now as we speak, struggling with figuring out how to peel it away from the providers that they've picked because they're not receiving the focus, the energy, or the efficacy in the delivery models that they thought they were going to get as the importance of the database stack has risen lately. So I think the early evolutionary signs of this trend happening are being shown in the way sourcing and staffing and the problem is being confronted. We fully expect to see more and more clients beginning to evolve into the data organization. But what you are starting to see also is the title of the data officer beginning to appear and the organizational framework underneath those data officers beginning to get built.
Mark, while we're on the subject, the next question somewhat relates to this. Talking about staffing, DBAs are becoming harder and harder to find, especially for round-the-clock coverage and with the broader skill sets that are being required today. Is managed services really a good way to resolve this?
Yeah, in our opinion, it's actually obviously the perfect way to solve it, and clearly I have an ulterior motive here on this call, and we have an objective we're trying to reach as a business. But the truth of the matter is the value proposition of a growing number of firms, not just DataVale, but others as well, who specialize as a pure play focus in the database services market can do that very important activity that I talked about earlier that is consuming the higher level DBAs at our client environments and in our client enterprises. Ultimately, your Tier 3 and Tier 4 DBAs are getting completely consumed with operational work. It's a drag on their internal value, and it's a drag on ultimately what they want to do inside their careers. And so managed services can be an augmentation and an addition to the overall approach that an enterprise embraces about how it is going to confront and tackle this growing problem.
Yeah, and I think I agree on that actually up front because we have seen customers actually who actually have had this data growth and increasing the number of databases actually struggle with this. Finding DBAs has definitely been an issue. So you really have to go to these managed service providers actually to help you with supplement the existing staff to actually deliver the efficiencies needed to support their business operations and innovation as well. So definitely, I think organizations who actually have had issues actually have routed more towards that whole managed services kind of a framework.
Okay, so what's a lot?
Yeah, no, I'm going to jump. I'm sorry, Howard. I want to jump in on one more point, and that is that counterintuitively, the reality is that a managed services framework can actually help increase retention inside the enterprise. And if you think about the things that cause DBA turnover and the constriction in the supply of DBAs relative to the amount of data that needs to be managed out there, at DataVale, we have an extremely high, what we would call really an outlier result in low attrition or high retention simply because all of the things that plague DBAs inside enterprises that cause them to leave, we've solved and others have solved because we aggregate DBAs together, the late night calls, the lower tiered work, the things that plague DBAs and sort of make it hard for them to have high job satisfaction is solved with inside our model, and then we deliver that value back to our clients so they actually find DBA retention and morale improving dramatically.
Okay. I'm confident that we can continue this conversation for another hour, but in respect for all of our attendees' time, we are at the top of the hour, and I just want to remind everybody. First of all, I want to thank Mark and Noel for an excellent presentation and an excellent discussion here at the eSeminar. For those of you who have attended, please feel free to download not only today's presentation, but the 2 white papers that DataVail has made available to you. We're going to, immediately after this, go to our survey. Please take the time to complete the survey, provide us with your feedback so we can continue to improve upon these eSeminars. For those of you who have been asking, because several of you have asked, a recorded version of this seminar, including the Q&A session we just did, will be available starting probably 24 hours from now at www.eseminarslive.com. So please feel free to visit that. Feel free to share that with your associates so you can share today's commentary with them. And you'll also be able to view a calendar of our upcoming events. Once again, our thanks to Mark and to Noel and to all of you for attending. We look forward to your survey input, and we look forward to seeing you at our next eSeminar.